Lightning like Steve McQueen. I'm in the fast lane when the light turns green. And I built tough, I ain't nothing but grit. Cause I made rugged blood, sweat, and spit. Yeah, like a horse I fly. Better push yourself in for a bumpy ride. I like to play hard, but I work harder. And I weather the storm cause I'm built stronger.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Morning Show, the top morning show in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines and, most importantly, provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I say that before every single show because I only speak to transportation professionals on this show, as well as my twice-a-week long-form podcast, because I want to put the right information out there from the people who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve, so you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. It's one of the many, many reasons why I proudly fly that American flag behind me every single day. A, we're the greatest nation on earth, but B, I'm living my American dream, and I want to help each and every one of you live yours as well. All right, you guys, happy Tuesday out there in the world. Bill McIntyre over on YouTube, Corey Buchan over on YouTube, as well as Tracy St. Clair over on YouTube. Good morning to you guys all. I got a very special guest for you guys here today. Flo, good morning. Micah, good morning to you. Nah, no orange shirt. I got the Freight Coach Logistics shirt on today, Micah, so I had to switch it up a little bit. But yeah, you guys, I got a very special guest for you. I'm a longtime fan of all of his work. He's been on the show before. He is all things technology in transportation. So I got my man, Eric Johnson from the JOC, back on the show. Eric, it's good to see you again.
Chris, awesome to be back. It's been too long.
Dude, it really has. But, you know, like we were talking before we got out there and started going live, man, you guys are out there just reporting about the realities of what goes on in the industry. There's a lot of information that's out there. And, you know, it's like, how do you kind of sift through all of that stuff as a journalist? I'm sure you get hit up all the time about leads and stories, and like, how do you sift through like what's real and what's not?
So great question. Before I get to that though, I just wanted to say, I totally, as someone who grew up in California, and now I live on the East Coast, and I grew up thinking there was a total East Coast bias, and there is. I totally appreciate that you give the time zone in Pacific and Central and omit the East Coast. I love it, even though I'm in the East Coast now. So definitely gold star for you on that. So it's a good question, right? Like, I'm not going to spend our whole time here talking about this, even though I could. The way that media in transportation and logistics has changed is massive over the last 15 to 20 years. It's not just during the pandemic. It was happening before then. There was a time where if you were interested in reading anything about trucking or air freight or the ports, there were like 4 or 5 publications that were covering those, you know, and most of it was like physical magazine. They all had websites, but the website was like an afterthought. Obviously, that has completely changed. Yeah. What you're doing has added to the array of things that people can turn to for information, right? And then, you know, even kind of like traditional media, mainstream, I hate calling it mainstream media, but like, you know, like the traditional newspapers and news outlets that cover it, they've also started covering this. So from our perspective, we're never going to like cover the entire universe of information that exists in the world of logistics. We know that some people are reporting on like what's going on in the Red Sea right now. We don't need to do blow by blow. This happened, and then these guys responded, and then from like a military perspective, right? There's other people doing that. All we do is we try to figure out, what do supply chain professionals, whether you're a driver on the road, logistics manager at a retailer, someone at an ocean carrier, anyone at any kind of 3PL, what pieces of information do you need to help you do your job better that day? Yeah. Basically, that's the starting point for us. And then, then it's just about building a network of people who you trust and talking to enough of them where it's not just one person's point of view, but you're starting to build like consensus around something.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, you don't write about it. You hold on to that information. You wait till you have that kind of like totality of information, I would say.
And I think like, you know, I really brought that up mainly because like there's so much information that comes out across all forms of media now, social media, publications, and it's like what's real and what's not, you know? And I try and like the angle I always try and take is at the end of the day, all of the people who listen to this show, rest assured, I'm at least in the industry working, right? So a lot of my opinions are coming from what I apply actually inside of my business. And the people that I bring on this show are subject matter experts inside of their lane. And I'm not just putting an opinion out there to put an opinion out there, right? Yeah. Like, as much as I love the First Amendment and free speech, I also understand that there's good and bad that can come with that, because at the end of the day, people need solutions. People need to know, like, hey, how do I make this work? I have everything invested in my business. I can't look at a certain headline or a tweet or something like that and think like everything is going to be bad. Like, I just interviewed a friend of mine yesterday. I released his podcast this morning. His fleet almost doubled in 2023. They added like 40 trucks last year. And contrary to everything you saw out there was doom and gloom, but it's like there are real people out there who are making moves happen. And that's the information I want to always have come out. Is I'm not saying that it's going to be easy and that you're going to be able to figure it out, but there are people who are making it work. And I think like that's the message that really needs to get out there.
I think one of the hardest things when you're writing is to provide the right amount of context without it bogging down what you want to write about. So there's news. News is something that is different than what happened yesterday, or, so like, someone opens a new LTL terminal, right? That is news. Is it huge news? Probably not. Is it relatively small news? Yes, because it's different than what existed yesterday. But you need to provide the context. Are they the 8th LTL provider to open a terminal in that region? Are they just catching up? Are they the first one? Are they opening the biggest one? So as the provider of news, you have to think about that context that news exists within, whether it's good, bad, or just sort of neutral. And then as the consumer, what you are alluding to, the challenge is you're not just getting information from 3-4 sources and then your own kind of like personal network. You're now getting bombarded with information from, I read a tweet saying LTL demand is like down 80% in that city where that terminal is going in. Mm-hmm. Well, that may be one person's tiny company and their demand went down, but on the whole, there's a ton of demand in that market, right? So it's very challenging, and you can't extricate yourself from this information overload, because then you're not informed at all. But you also can't overweight little pieces of information that you get that are not reflective of the entire universe. So it's like we all have a bigger challenge than we ever did before, because it's information overload. So you have to you can't just look at one source. You shouldn't just look at the Journal of Commerce. I hope we are one of the things that you trust to inform you. But if you just read us, you're not going to get everything. And anyone who says they're giving you everything, whether it's a publication or a consultant or a 3PL, is lying to you, because that's just not possible.
Yeah. So. No, I'm right there with you, Eric. And this is what I always loved about what you and what you guys stand for as an organization, right? Is because that's been kind of the underlying message the whole time is it's like, hey, there are a lot of information out there. Look at multiple sources. We love all of our readers and all of our users, but like, you got to double check everything out there and go and check it out. Because I think like that's one thing that, even from like a business owner's perspective, like, you in the freight world, for example, you pay for load board access, rating software, and everything. There's a lot of data that's out there, but is one data source the best? I think there's a cumulative, like there's certain areas that everyone excels above others, but you have to look at multiple things to make the best decision. I think that's what every quality leader of any organization, sales team, they all look at that. They look at all the data sources. They look at all the information that's out there, and they make the best decision based off of that information.
Yeah, agreed. For us, I think on the reporting side of things, we obviously love data. We incorporate a ton of data. We've like amped up the amount of data we provide our subscribers now more than we ever have before. But also it's like, ideally we're reporting, you're finding out stuff from us that hasn't been reflected in the data yet, because it's like, most data is reporting from yesterday or 2 weeks ago or a month ago or the first half. And yeah, some of it is like looking ahead, but reporting is kind of that like leading edge of where, what you need to know going into your day. So that's, yeah, I agree with you. Like it has to be a basket of information.
Yeah. So let's switch to tech, because this is what you are out here. You talk to more people in the tech world of transportation and logistics than, at least that I know. And so like, what's the general consensus out there, right? Because the article you put out, I want to say it was between Christmas and New Year's about the VC money. Like, is it actually a thing? Like, what's the consensus out there from who people you're talking to?
I would say just like everything else in transportation, there is no consensus. That's the problem. That's the beauty and the curse of our industry, right? Like is we all can't come to an agreement on anything. And yet that somehow is a strong point of our industry. So the article you're referring to, it was a column. It wasn't really, this is something where I took a whole bunch of conversation and a whole bunch of thought that I had put into this topic for 6 months. I didn't write it the first day I thought of it.
Yeah.
I literally sat on it, let it marinate for 6 months. Was addressing whether all the money that had come into the transportation logistics industry via venture capital, whether that had yielded the outcomes that the investors that had put literally billions of dollars in, what they were seeking, right? Like, not would this money have been better spent somewhere else? Not that sort of thing. Just sort of like a more basic, does venture capital, which expects a certain level of return after a certain number of years, work in logistics, which is, like we just talked about, super fragmented.
Yeah.
There's hardly a dominant player in any part of the industry.
Yep.
People take a long time to make decisions. So it's not a quick sales decision-making industry. It's usually thin margins. So people don't have a ton of budget. So, some of those things are opportunities. Some of those things are roadblocks.
Yeah.
And it was just, I was just asking an honest question. Like, has this venture capital experiment worked out for the investors like they thought it would? And it's a TBD. I think one of the things I didn't get to go into is there's nuance, context, like we talked about before. There's context, right? There's a difference between a general fund that invests in a bunch of different industries, doesn't have a logistics specialist, invested in a company because they love the founder, thought the idea was cool, but didn't really like internalize the challenges of the logistics industry.
Yeah.
Versus a VC that is a specialist in supply chain or logistics even, versus a seed stage fund that was like started by a former logistics professional.
Yeah.
And they like get every last aspect of it. And then there's also, Schneider, Walmart, a bunch of international 3PLs, a bunch of ocean carriers have corporate venture capital arms, right? That's a different investment also than what was made, by like some of the big names in venture capital. So there is no consensus. And I don't think the story is told yet. Like, honestly, I had a couple venture investors tell me it's probably still another 5 years before we figure out whether some of these bigger bets actually panned out, right? Because last year was a down market for freight, like, or a tepid market, I would say. It wasn't, it was a little bit down.
Yeah.
And a lot of the companies raised too much money and they overhired in the pandemic. Yeah. And so it's not the right time. It's like, just like we shouldn't judge how great they are at the very top of the pandemic when everything was going crazy. We shouldn't overhype how terrible they are at the bottom of the trough, right? Like we need to find that like middle ground and then judge them. So
I'm right there with you, right? Like I see that all the time because it was like, obviously going, being as involved in this industry as I am over these last couple of years, well, frankly, my entire adult life, but especially over these last couple of years, it's crazy that when the market was hot and everything was hot and these valuations were up, it was the golden boy syndrome, can't do anything wrong. And, I like, and then you see the downfall of where that was. And, as somebody who's a student of business, I think I'm like, what was wrong? Right. Because you mentioned Convoy in your article, and I truly think that what they were trying to do is what could be done at scale in this industry for specific fragments of it, right? For the highly commoditized loads that never change, the 35,000 pounds of one product that's always 26 pallets, that's always going to be on a drive-in, that always moves between Dallas and Houston, for a hypothetical example. I could see that being a thing one day.
Yeah.
And because that's kind of what a lot of brokers talk about doing anyways, right? Yeah. Convoy, I think, was just, if you're going to give out credit where credit's due, at least they were bold enough to just throw out hey, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to try and attack it. This is how we're going to try and change the industry.
So I think, obviously looking back on this in a few years' time, we'll have a little bit better view of this. But I think the big question right now is, was Convoy an anomaly, or were they the canary in the coal mine? And you could argue at this point that they are the anomaly for a couple different reasons. They chose the technology-enabled intermediary model. They never were trying to build software. They were never trying to build data, SaaS, all that stuff that is the traditional thing that VCs invest in. They raised so much money that there was only a certain number of paths that were available to them at a certain point. And that was get over the hump, succeed, get another huge round of investment because the financials started working, and then the flywheel starts taking effect, or you got to get acquired, or you got to go public.
Yeah.
Or you go out of business. Those are the only options after you raise as much money as they did. And that was the risk, and that was the bet. And in some ways, the way that it all happened was like a quintessential VC outcome, which is you make a big bet. A whole bunch of people made a big bet and it didn't pan out. And for the investors, you move on to the next bet.
Yeah.
The people who are in the business, who poured their heart and soul into it for 4 or 5 years, it hurts like hell because you felt like you were doing something different. And it may be that they, paved the way for someone else to be successful in their path. But I look at like I did a story that got a lot less attention about a month prior to that. I did a story in November or maybe early December about a whole bunch of companies, I think all of whom are venture backed or were raising money, who were trying to democratize technology for smaller companies, whether it's smaller carriers, smaller brokers, smaller shippers, right? All of those companies are essentially using the same asset class, venture capital, but they've taken to this point a lot less money. And so the different outcomes for them are a lot more numerous now than if they had taken 300 million, 500 million, $1 billion, right? So I think I'm really interested to see in 24 whether things stabilize a little bit, or whether because you were talking about people giving us lots of information, right? I have a lot of people telling me who's about to go out of business next month, or I was talking with someone and I heard this CEO is going to be canned in the next month, right? That if I wrote every time someone told me one of those things, I'd be out of a job. I'd be writing my own tinfoil hat blog, and living off ramen basically, because there's a lot of information there's a lot of unverified information. I won't even say it's false, but it's unverified, right? So I'm interested this year to see how many of those things come to fruition, or whether people kind of stabilize, make it through, and then consolidate and start to get, stronger again. So
I think there's a lot to be said about like hearing that and waiting, right? Because like, I mean, I don't get it at the volume that you do, but man, I hear all the rumblings through DMs all the time. And I'm just like, I don't need to be first to like talk about some of this stuff, like I would rather put the right information out there at the end of the day. And, I think this year is going to be, it's going to be interesting to see where it all kind of turns, right? And I think like there's going to be a lot of companies who are going to, like, I don't want to say their numbers are going to get called, but like, is your product actually as scalable and viable for the transportation industry as what has been marketed? Because you could market, especially when you raise money, you got a lot of marketing dollars to throw out there, but
for sure.
Is it viable through a down market in a down cycle? And I think that that's kind of what we saw, because like FreightTech really started humming in like 2017, 2018, right? And then they kind of hit and then rose up, and then
all the way to the end of 21, through the end of like mid 22, I would say, is when it started to like the cracks started to appear.
That you got to go through multiple market cycles to really see, is this going to be sustainable for the long term, right? Because I think, you look at tracking, I think tracking software is it, I don't know if anybody's going to be able to come in and take over that from.
It's commoditized over time.
Yeah.
Basically. So can I point out, I can't remember if we talked about this, but this one's always stuck out in my head. So I think you were at this event. This was the JOC Inland event in 22.
Yes.
Right. This is our surface transportation, trucking, LTL, drayage, intermodal event that we hold in Chicago in September every year. I started putting together panels for that in like April. And in April, the market, the venture market was just starting to get a little sketchy, right?
Yeah.
Like Convoy had raised a huge amount in April. And then like 2 months later, they were laying people off and a whole bunch of people, right? So it was right at that time. So up until that point, I had written a bunch of stories about tech that was enabling small carriers, independent drivers, small fleets, that kind of thing. Because I thought it was really interesting. It was like putting in that same thing I was mentioning before, putting in the hands of companies that never had the budget. And in some cases, they like don't even have the time because they're driving to like sit down and manage their business through tech, right? I thought it was really interesting because I was like, if these things catch on and every driver essentially can run their business more efficiently, that's amazing for the entire industry, right? For shippers, for brokers, everybody, right? Maybe not for brokers. I don't know. Maybe carriers go direct to shippers because they are so much more efficient. But I put together a panel at Inland that year in 22 with 3 of the technology providers catering to small carriers. And the panel was, how are you going to help your customer base manage what looks like it's going to be a pretty big down year?
Yeah.
Because it's great. It's great when you get everyone signing up when all these new companies are coming into the market and there's freight everywhere they look. It's falling out of trees. It's another thing when it gets a little, it's a cold winter and it's, and you got to fight for everything and the rates suck and, you got to be a little smarter about what you accept and what you don't. And I think back to that panel a lot because, honestly, a lot of those companies that were catering to the small carriers, they struggled just as much as the small carriers last year.
Yeah.
Because they weren't able to sell their value to that small carrier base as well as they did when things were really good, which is telling in its own way. Right. Yeah. Doesn't mean they're bad companies. Doesn't mean they won't ultimately be great, but they weren't able to like even out the highs and the lows as well as you might think they might be able to.
Yeah. I think a lot of these market implications that we see really show who is an actual business owner and who is kind of just like living off of mom and dad's credit card. And I'm not like, because I think that kind of comes with, the risk of when you do raise capital, right? Because in here, and this is just, again, I have like, when I get to 50, 100, 200, $500 million, my opinion might change, but I think that there's a big difference between having to bootstrap and fight and claw to build your revenue base as opposed to, hey, I have this really good idea. And I'm not saying it's easy to raise $100 million or anything like that, but there's a big difference between working for that revenue or at least getting it to where you build it up to a couple of $1 million from nothing and then you raise capital. And I think that there's a big difference out there because like if you didn't, and I think it's like, you can almost apply it to the lottery syndrome, right? How many lottery winners are broke within a couple of years after winning it? And then you ask
or athletes who don't have a good sense of how to manage money, right? Like that was prevalent all the time growing up when we were growing up. So,
yeah. And that's the thing, man, is it's like when you're able to raise money easy, when you have a lot of money in the bank, you tend to spend it very, very quickly. And I don't know the insides of any of these operations, but I think that it will probably come to light here in a few years, right? Because I've heard that term raise too much money often. I'm like, how do you blow $1 billion?
But see, this is the issue, right? When you raise 100 million, the expectation is not that you put it in a bank account and earn 5%
for sure
in a treasury. The expectation is you will spend a good chunk of that, if not all of that, to build the business, to scale it. So this is like the heart of what I was trying to get at. Is that model, does that fit in the logistics world where honestly there's a lot of bootstrap companies from you all the way to like small brokers to small technology providers that don't get a lot of attention, but they're doing good work and they're profitable, right?
Yes.
That those companies don't have any marketing budget at all, but they turn a profit and people get paid and they don't have a boom and a trough and a boom and a trough the same way that companies that are this is what I want to get at is like the mistake that the founders make to me is not, did I spend the money too quickly? The mistake is, did I take venture in the first place? Because with venture comes the expectation you are going to spend a lot of money, seemingly an insane amount of money, right? So the real question is, do I take venture or do I look for another way to fund this business, knowing how long it will take to build it into what I think it can be, right?
Yeah. And I think that, these are all the risks that you're willing to take. And I said this a couple weeks ago, or I think it was actually when I was talking about your article that you wrote on my show is, I always say, I'm like, hey, I will always give a Dan Lewis credit for going out there and trying, right? And all of these founders were all of these companies that have now gone bankrupt. Those founders at least tried no matter what. And all of the people who are Monday morning quarterbacking it are all sitting on the sidelines, right? And I think that and why I'm like passionate about this stuff, because I go back and forth all the time about this. Like, do I raise at some point to scale? Is it going to be worth it? Or do I bootstrap it all the way up and be self-reliant? And because I can't answer that question. I can answer for certain. I never want to give away overall control of my company, right? Like I will always be the majority owner of my business, but there are certain levels that, you see this and you're like, is it really worth it? Do you lose? And because I have another buddy of mine, he has built a very successful company. He does like $50 to $60 million a year in revenue. And I asked him, I'm like, so where are you going with this? He's like, I'm staying right here. Yeah. He's like, this is where I want to be. He's like, this is the size of company I want to run. I don't want to get any bigger. And he said this, and it stuck with me. I don't ever want to lose who I was to build me here. And I'm afraid if I go any bigger than this, my customers might lose out on the personal touch that I can deliver right now. And I'm like, damn, that's heavy, but that's a guy who knows where they're going.
Yep. The fact of the matter is, when you go the venture route, your control of your business starts eroding straight away, even before you've lost majority share. Every round you can expect to be diluted 10 to 20%, right? Yeah. So if you raise 4 rounds, you're already no longer the majority owner.
Yeah.
But even before that, those investors are going to have a huge say about the direction of your company.
Yep.
And so again, there's going to be some outstanding outcomes from venture-backed companies in logistics. To me, the question was, does it work on the real high end of the scale, right? Where it's like 5-6 rounds, 10 figures of money raised or more? Like, that's an open question. So
I think, and I can't believe we're already out of time.
I know we're done here.
I feel like we're just kind of getting going. My prediction is if that does happen, there's like, this is just my gut, over the next 5 years, depending on how kind of the overall economy really performs, you're going to have a very proven model to raise substantial money moving forward. I don't think the napkin ideas are going to fly. I don't know if we'll ever see it again in our lifetime, man, because that was interesting.
I don't know.
Free.
I don't know. There's people who went through the 2000s.com bubble and this past one who are like, oh, just wait, it'll come back again. It may take 15 years, but it'll come back again. So
I love it, man. Well, hey, Eric, how does anybody reach out to you if they have any questions or find out more about the JOC?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm still on Twitter, despite my best intentions. LogTech Eric on Twitter. Eric, you find me easily on LinkedIn, and eric.johnson@spglobal.com is my email if you want to email me.
Perfect. I love it, man. And as always, if you guys can't find Eric, just reach out to me. I'll put you in contact with them. Eric, thank you so much. And
it's great.
Dude, I love it, man. And if you guys got value in what you heard, as always, subscribe to the show. You guys share it out there to your network. This is how we reach and help more people, is because of each and every one of you. And the fact that if you see value, your network will see value as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. And we'll be talking to you soon.